Let's prove the inequality. Absolute value a minus b is less than or equal to absolute value of a plus absolute value of b. We're going to do two proofs here. The first proof will not use a triangle inequality, and we'll just go by case basis. And the second proof will just be the triangle inequality. So let's start off with the first proof. We're going to have four cases here. Case 1 is if a and b are both greater than or equal to 0. So in this case, both a and b are non-negative, and in this first case, we will consider two cases. Okay, the first one being a is greater than or equal to b. Well, if a is greater than or equal to b, that means a minus b is greater than or equal to 0. And so that means that the absolute value of a minus b will equal a minus b. So this means that if the inside of the absolute value is greater than or equal to 0, you could just remove the absolute value. Okay, and then absolute value a will be a, and absolute value b will be b. Because here both a and b are non-negative. So what we have is absolute value of a minus b is equal to a minus b, which is less than or equal to a plus b. And that's going to equal absolute value of a plus absolute value of b. Now the second case is if a is less than b, then we have a minus b is less than 0. So the absolute value of a minus b will just be equal to b minus a. Okay, so basically you can think of it as like you're adding a and the opposite of b. So, and we have absolute value of a equals a, absolute value of b is equal to b. Since again, a and b are both positive. Okay, so we have absolute value of a minus b is equal to b minus a, which is less than or equal to b plus a, and that's equal to absolute value of a plus absolute value of b. So in both cases, what you end up with is the absolute value of a minus b is less than or equal to absolute value of a plus absolute value of b. Now let's look at the second case. A is greater than or equal to 0 and b is less than 0. So in this case, a is non-negative and b is negative. So here, the absolute value of a minus b is going to be the same thing as a minus b, because a minus b is greater than 0. Just think of it as like 2 minus negative 3, that's 5. Right? So a is 2, b is negative 3, for example. So if you subtract them, you get a positive number. And so we have the absolute value of a minus b is equal to b minus a. Or sorry, is equal to a minus b. Right, from here. And that's going to be less than or equal to a plus parentheses negative b. So basically you're just factoring out, doing plus negative b. And that's going to equal the same thing as absolute value of a plus absolute value of b. Because b is negative, when you multiply by negative, now that becomes positive, which is the same thing as absolute value of b. And so that means that the absolute value of a minus b is less than or equal to the absolute value of a plus the absolute value of b. Now the third case, now a will be negative and b will be non-negative. So the absolute value of a minus b is the same thing as saying negative a minus b. Or if you distribute the negative, that's the same thing as b minus a. And here it's because b minus a is greater than 0. And so we have absolute value of a minus b equals b minus a less than or equal to negative a plus b, just rearranging the order, which is equal to absolute value of A plus absolute value of B, because A is negative, negative A makes it positive, and so absolute value of A will be equal to negative A. And so we say that the absolute value of A minus B is less than or equal to absolute value of A plus absolute value of B. And then finally, the last case, both of them will be negative. So either, well, let's say the absolute value of A is greater than or equal to the absolute value of B, then that means that absolute value of A minus B is the same thing as absolute value of A minus absolute value of B. So this you can think of like A equals -3, B equals -2. If I subtract these, -3 minus -2 is just -1. And that's just the same thing as saying absolute value of 3. So let me just write it out. So it's -3 minus -2 is the same thing as saying absolute value -3 minus absolute value -2. So that's all going to be 1. And then this will be less than or equal to them adding it. So whenever you're adding a non-negative number, it's always going to be bigger than or equal to then subtracting that non-negative number. The other case is if the absolute value of A is less than absolute value of B, then that means that absolute value of A minus B equals absolute value of B minus absolute value of A, and that's because A minus B is less than 0. So in this case, if we do an example, we can say A is -2, B is -3, so you have absolute value of -2 minus -3. That's going to be the same thing as absolute value of 2 minus absolute value of -3, which in this case, it's going to be 1. Oops, I changed the order. -3 and -2. So that's going to be 1. Okay, so this will be less than or equal to, again, instead of subtracting them, it'll be adding them, which rearranging it will just be absolute value of A plus absolute value of B. And so in both cases, we have that absolute value of A minus B is less than or equal to absolute value of A plus absolute value of B. So all 4 cases, we come up with the same conclusion. And so the given is proven. Now, for the triangle inequality, this one is a lot easier because we know that the absolute value of A plus B is less than or equal to absolute value of A plus absolute value of B. If instead we plug in -B, then we get this. And so that's the same thing as saying absolute value of A minus B is less than or equal to absolute value of A. And then the negative just disappears because it's inside the absolute value. And so we get this inequality.